You've probably wondered this at some point without ever quite putting it into words. There are 51 of these silos sitting practically on top of each other under the exact same stretch of land, and somehow, across 300 years, not one of them has ever actually reached another. That's not believable as an accident, which means there's a real reason behind it, something bigger than the founders just preferring people isolated for no purpose at all. Lucas Kyle actually stumbles onto part of that answer, finding a tunnel that shouldn't exist, and the first thing that happens isn't an explanation. It's a warning that just knowing the tunnel is there could already be enough to get an entire silo killed. Nobody explains why a tunnel is worth that much fear. The show just lets the threat sit there, which means the actual question, why would silos connecting to each other be the one thing this whole system can't survive, is still wide open. Only 4 people in this show's history have ever actually found this tunnel: Salvador Quinn, Judge Meadows, George Wilkins, and now Lucas, which is a strange group to have in common, since 2 of them are ordinary citizens while the other 2 are a former head of IT and the silo's top judge, both stumbling onto the exact same buried secret decades apart from George and Lucas. Whatever put Quinn and Meadows in a position to find it probably wasn't luck, since people that close to the top of a silo's power structure are exactly the ones positioned to notice something the rest of the population never gets near. Judge Meadows' own fate makes this even harder to write off as coincidence, since she's murdered partway through the 2nd season, and whatever immediate motive the show gives for her death at the time, she's one of exactly 4 people this whole story has ever confirmed found that tunnel. Whether her death actually traces back to that specific knowledge is genuinely unconfirmed. But knowing how this system treats anyone who gets too close to what the tunnels actually connect to, that timing deserves more suspicion than a passing mention. George found it first among the ordinary residents, years before any of this, and told Juliet about it, though nothing came of that since she ended up leaving Silo 18 not long after. Whatever this tunnel actually leads to, the pattern's already telling you something. It isn't guarded by locks or soldiers. It's guarded by nobody knowing it exists in the first place, and the one time an ordinary worker does find it, the response isn't arrest, it's a direct threat that finding it at all could get everyone around him killed. There's a theory building around exactly this tunnel right now, tied to Ed Harwood's own expertise reading the silo's physical structure. The idea is that these tunnels weren't always meant to be a secret. They may have originally been built to actually connect the silos, some kind of shared infrastructure for moving resources or passing messages between them, before whoever's running the algorithm decided that connection made rebellion too easy to organize and buried the tunnel's existence instead. There's a version of this that makes real sense from the founder's own side too, since 51 silos is an enormous hedge against any one of them failing outright, and a hedge like that only works fully if a failing silo can actually be reached and helped rather than just quietly written off. Building a way to move people or supplies between silos during a real catastrophe isn't paranoid design. It's exactly what you'd expect from planners smart enough to build 51 of these things in the first place. None of that's confirmed by the show yet, but it reframes the entire question in a useful way. Total isolation might not be what the founders originally intended. It might be something the system evolved into once it learned, the hard way, exactly what connection actually makes possible. What connection makes possible is worth taking seriously, because there's real evidence behind it, not just fear, and this is where the books go further than anything the show has confirmed. So it's worth being clear that what follows comes from the novel specifically. A cluster of 11 silos led by one called Silo 40 didn't just resist quietly the way Silo 17 eventually did. They coordinated with each other directly, severed contact with the central authority running the whole system, and jammed their own termination signal outright instead of hoping someone on the inside would sabotage it for them the way Anna did for Silo 17. That's the actual difference connection makes. One silo sabotaging its own kill order from within is survivable for the system, since it still only costs one silo and leaves the wider network untouched, while 11 silos coordinating to block that kill order entirely isn't survivable in the same way, since it proves the system's main weapon can be beaten outright rather than merely dodged. The response wasn't gas, since gas wasn't an option anymore. Once the signal itself was jammed, it was demolishing that entire cluster physically instead, a far more drastic and costly measure than anything used against a single isolated uprising. What jamming an actual termination signal even requires says something about the scale involved too, since this isn't one clever person quietly flipping a switch the way Anna managed for Silo 17, acting mostly alone. Blocking a kill signal outright across 11 separate silos means coordinated engineering, shared knowledge of how that signal actually travels, and enough trust between populations who'd never met each other to pull off a plan that large without a single person selling it out along the way. Which isn't a small technical trick, it's an entire alliance functioning well enough in total secrecy to beat a weapon the system had never lost to before. That's the actual answer sitting underneath the question. This was always about what 10 silos, or 50, can do once they realize the same lie is being told everywhere at once, and once they're in a position to act on that together, instead of each fighting the same battle alone and losing it the same way every single time. The safeguard itself backs this up too, and this part comes from the books as well. It serves two jobs at once, not just the one people usually assume, ending an uprising if one actually breaks out, and just as importantly, keeping the outside world and the existence of other silos concealed in the first place. Concealing that other silos exist at all is one of the two things this weapon was actually built to protect, sitting right alongside stopping people from rebelling once they already know too much, which means isolation was never an accidental side effect of a system built purely to prevent revolt. It was baked into the design from the very start, as important as the killing itself. Line that up against what actually happened at Silo 17 and a detail gets a lot more interesting. The rebels who died out there weren't found right at the airlock. They were found further out, in the open, and by most accounts didn't make it as far as they seem to have been trying to go. Where exactly they were headed isn't something the show has confirmed, but the geography raises an obvious question on its own. If dozens of other silos exist scattered across that same stretch of land, and a group of desperate rebels just broke free of their own for the first time in generations, heading towards something out there isn't a wild guess. It's the single most logical thing an uprising like that would actually attempt once the door was finally open. Whether that was ever the actual plan is genuinely unconfirmed, but the show has given you enough pieces to wonder about it honestly, instead of assuming they were just wandering into the wasteland with nowhere in mind. None of this makes the fear of connection paranoid either, and that's fair to admit before landing anywhere final. A system managing 51 separate populations under one lie has a real, practical problem the moment any two of them can compare notes, since each silo's entire cover story depends on residents believing their own situation is unique, the last people on Earth, an isolated tragedy nobody chose. The instant two silos can actually talk to each other, that story falls apart on contact, not because anyone reveals some grand secret, but because the sheer existence of another silo living under the exact same rules, told the exact same lies, is itself the evidence that this was engineered rather than natural. You don't need Quinn's whole history or the algorithm's actual nature to break that illusion. You just need one honest conversation between two populations who each thought they were completely alone. Think about what actually changes for one ordinary resident the moment they learn another silo exists, living under the identical set of rules. It isn't that they suddenly know the whole truth about the founders or the before times. It's that every excuse they've ever been given for their own confinement stops sounding like an explanation and starts sounding like a script, the same script, running in 51 different rooms at once. That's a harder thing to unlearn than any single fact, and it doesn't require proof of some grand conspiracy. Two people comparing notes on the exact same excuse is often all it takes to stop believing it. That also explains why the tunnels get buried rather than simply destroyed outright. A system this committed to secrecy could have collapsed those passages the moment it decided connection was too dangerous to risk, but instead they stay intact, hidden rather than eliminated, which suggests whoever's actually in charge still sees some genuine use for them, moving people or supplies quietly in a real emergency, some contingency worth preserving even at the risk of someone like George or Lucas eventually finding the entrance by accident. Keeping a danger like that alive instead of sealing it forever is its own quiet admission that total isolation has costs. The system isn't fully willing to pay either, not even for its own peace of mind. There's a real irony sitting in all of this too. If the tunnels really were built for legitimate resource sharing, the founders' own planning is what eventually handed their descendants the exact vulnerability that took down 11 silos at once, building something smart enough to survive almost anything except the one form of cooperation its own architecture made possible. The kind of mistake that only shows up generations later, long after nobody left running things, even remembers why the tunnels are there in the first place. Ed Harwood's role in all this deserves its own weight too. His actual job is reading the physical evidence of how old this silo really is. The wear on tunnels, the stress and support shafts, the kind of detail that already contradicts the official founding story once you look closely enough, which makes him exactly the kind of person who'd eventually notice a tunnel system that makes far more sense as connective infrastructure than as some meaningless architectural leftover nobody ever explains. The show hasn't confirmed he's connected any of these dots himself yet, but it's placed the one person capable of doing it directly next to all the evidence that would let him, which is exactly the tension sitting underneath Season 3 right now. Lucas already knows more than almost anyone alive about what these tunnels actually are, and he's currently the one person the algorithm is most actively hunting down. So, if connection really is the one failure mode this system has never solved cleanly, keeping Lucas contained isn't just about protecting one secret among many, It's about making sure the one person who understands what Silo 18 could actually connect to never gets the chance to try it. The 51 number already sitting in the middle of this whole mystery might connect to it too. Bernard once corrected the official count from 50 to 51 without ever explaining why the extra one exists, and an unexplained 51st silo fits neatly into a story about connective infrastructure nobody's supposed to know about. Whether that silo was actually built as a hub for the very tunnel system this whole question is built around, or something else entirely, is exactly the kind of gap worth watching for as this season keeps going. So here's where the actual answer lands. Two silos meeting is dangerous not because talking is inherently risky on its own, but because talking is the one thing capable of doing what no single population trapped inside one silo can ever manage alone, recognizing the lie for exactly what it is, and organizing around that recognition before anyone at the top can contain it quietly. Silo 17 proved a single silo's rebellion can be managed, sabotaged, or survived in ways that don't require the system's most extreme response. While Silo 40's cluster proved that once several silos act together, even the safeguard itself stops being enough, and demolition becomes the only option left standing. That gap between the two outcomes is the entire reason isolation is worth this much enforcement in the first place. The one scenario this system has never figured out how to survive gracefully is silos that stop being alone at all, not a single rebellious silo acting by itself.